Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Planning and Development Committee of November 20th to order, please. We had an audit committee meeting that ran a little bit late, so my apologies for having to delay the start of today's planning committee. There are some changes, members of committee, to the agenda. If you could make note that on item 5.2 is a delegation, we'll bring forward the report 7.2 at that time, and there is a replacement page 7.2.1 in front of you. There is also an addition of a presentation by Daniela Balasal. It'll be 6.1. It is a development of the framework for the City of Brampton's affordable housing strategy, and you have a copy of the presentation before you, and it's related to 7.3. Are there any other additions or changes? Oh, and item 9.1 under other business. It's a resolution that relates to properties on Kennedy Road South, 7646, 7660, 7686, and 0 Kennedy Road South. You won't have a copy of it before you, but the clerk has it, and it will be on the screen at the time that we deal with it. Okay? With those changes to the agenda, would someone like to move approval? Councillor Willens, all those in favor? That's carried. I'd like to remind everybody if you could put your cell phones on inaudible mode so as not to disturb today's meeting. And members of committee, if you could try to refrain from sending text messages and emails, would be appreciated. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none. We go down to the consent agenda. 7.3 will need to be removed as it relates to the presentation on 6.1. Are there any other changes to the consent agenda? Councillor Fattini, would you take 7.3 out? That's great. Seeing none, would someone like to move consent agenda? Councillor Gibson, all in favor? That's carried. There are no statutory public meeting reports. Item 7.1 is an amendment to the sign bylaw 399-2002 as amended. It's the Canadian Railway Company, east side of Winston Churchill Boulevard, south of Wanless, east of Finch Avenue, south of Steeles, in wards 6 and 8. As this is a statutory public meeting as it relates to that report, is anybody in attendance that wishes to speak to that? Seeing none. Councillor Willens will move report 7.1. All those in favor? I'm sorry, Mayor Jeffrey.
I ask a quick question. When
Yes.
did temporary become 10 years? Like, it's 10 years. Like, this is a pretty high-profile intersection. I wonder if we might want to just make it 5 years with an option to renew, but we may have a different decision in 10 years, and I'd hate to have our hands tied.
Marco, did you want to come down and speak to this? Actually, okay, we'll bring forward 7.1 and deal with it now.
Through you, Madam Chair, just to address the temporary period. I do understand that it is a significant temporary period. It is in relation to the interim control bylaw that is currently in effect for Northwest Brampton, recognizing that that interim control bylaw dates back to 2003 with no end in sight as to the expiry and the resolution of the appeals at the OMB. It was thought to be appropriate certainly to recommend a 10-year approval, being that it has been well over 10 years already. Certainly happy to consider any reduced time frame as council would see fit.
Well, I'm just suggesting maybe 5 years with an option to renew, but I think we're going to be doing some major building up in that part of the world, and I would think it's fairly visible. We may decide we want to do something different. So I want council to have the opportunity to make the decision. So if that's a reasonable request through you, Madam Chair, I think 5 years with an option to renew for 5, but I think temporary to me is I don't know, 3 to 6 months, 9 months, a year, not 10 years.
I've got a committee of adjustment ruling that's been 55 years, so.
Wow. Okay, well, I think that's a long time, so.
It is.
My suggestion is 5.
So,
Can
in
we do
terms
that?
of navigating, I know that the report, the recommendation doesn't speak specifically to the 10 years, but it's embedded in the report. So, what's the best way to manage this, Mr. Clerk?
Through you, Madam Chair, maybe an amendment to staff recommendation 2, which would be to enact the signed bylaw amendment, subject to an amendment to limit the terms to 5 years with a 5-year renewal.
And that would just be the term related to the one at Winston Churchill, not the Finch Avenue site.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do you have that, Mr. Clerk? Okay. All those in favor of the amendment? That's carried. All those in favor of the recommendation as amended? That's carried. And Mayor Jeffrey can move those? Sure. Well, I know you don't count as quorum, but so it's like you're here, but you're not here. Okay. We move now to item 5.2, and we welcome Antoine Belieff, Director of Regional Planning for Metrolinx. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
We don't let you sit down here at the City of Brampton like we do at the region. We make you stand so you can make a quick getaway.
That's quite all right. I was standing over an hour in Hamilton, so I just bring comfortable shoes. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here, Madam Chair, Your Worship, members of Council, and I apologize in advance to regional councillors who have heard this presentation before. It's the same presentation, and I hope that at least I'll be consistent. I don't need to introduce Metrolinx, Regional Transportation Agency, and really the only regional agency of any sort that we have in the region. So we published The Big Move, our first regional transportation plan in 2008, and it gave rise to unprecedented investment in transit in the region. So GO RER, but also the Mississauga Transitway, and a number of GO expansions, increased frequencies across the region. And of course, if you ever drive in Toronto, Eglinton Crosstown is very much an active project under construction. It is now time to update the plan after 10 years, and we are in the middle of consultation for the draft plan. Last year, we released the discussion paper in anticipation of the draft plan. The discussion paper was based on an analysis, research that was conducted in collaboration with academic institutions and of course your own staff. On September 14th of this year, our board approved the draft plan for release, and we have been actively listening to the population, stakeholders, municipalities, presenting at a number of councils throughout the region, and we will present the findings to our board in December, and aiming to release an updated draft early next year, and then we'll see exactly where we land for a final plan. We plan to spend the next year on implementation. I can proactively tell you in advance that a lot of what we heard is that we need to think about implementation. A lot of the comments we received was about how wonderful the plan is, but what does it mean for us, who, when, etc. So we are very much aware of the need to proceed to implementation. I touched on engagement, and we have engaged in a number of ways through the Planning Leaders Forum, which meets on a regular basis with the chief planner and brings staff from upper tier municipalities as well as lower tier municipalities that operate the transit system, so that includes Brampton. We also have a municipal technical advisory committee that brings together more technical experts from your transportation planning or land use planning departments that has been meeting over the last 2 years in a very iterative fashion to review the various plans, the modeling results, making sure that we have the right input from your respective TMPs. We also convened a residence reference panel. If you're familiar with this approach, we sent 10,000 letters throughout the region and selected in the end 36 members that were reflective of the geographic, socio-demographic, and gender diversity of the region, so exactly 18 men and 18 women, and actually a majority of members who drive cars and do not take transit to reflect the current reality of the region. They met over 5 Saturdays and in the end made 7 recommendations which form the base of the draft plan. We have conducted a number of public roundtables throughout the region. The Peel Roundtable was the very first one and was held on October 5th. And I don't have the stats with me right now, but we have received thousands of comments on our website already. We have not significantly changed the vision from the big move, which is the good news. We were on the right track. We have just tweaked it a bit. What we did is that we took what was then about 20 goals and objectives that were very difficult to remember and really navigate through, and crystallized it to 3 goals. Strong connections, speaking to the essence of our mandate, to connect people in the region. Complete travel experiences, this is a renewed emphasis on the quality of the experience, and sustainable communities, which is really the reason why we are all here doing what we do, which is to support the vision of a high quality of life, prosperous competitive economy, and a protected environment. The draft plan contains 5 strategies, and I'll briefly go over each. Strategy 1 is to complete the delivery of current regional transit projects. It's easy to forget as planners and elected officials that just announcing a project doesn't actually make it, doesn't actually complete it. And we wanted to continue to raise awareness that we need to keep pressing and to make sure that we complete all the projects that are currently in various phases of advancement. Strategy number 2 is the recognition that we need to build a lot more to achieve our end vision to 2041, the vision of the growth plan. And that we need to integrate all the services together. Strategy 3 is about the optimization of the system, looking at transportation demand management, looking at station access, looking at fare and service integration, looking at completing or expanding the network of HOV lanes, and completing a cycling network, among many other proposals. And strategy number 5 is preparing for an uncertain future, working with new mobility business models such as Uber and similar companies, and the arrival of autonomous vehicles. There's a number of rapid transit projects in Peel in the plan, so I won't go over each one. The ones that are relevant to Brampton are bolded. The difference between in delivery and in development is that in delivery projects are fully funded for construction, while projects in development have significant funding allocated for planning, design, and engineering. Proposed projects are net new projects that are proposed to 2041, and you have a number of projects again in Peel and a fair number of these in Brampton. We are proposing to integrate all these services into what we call the frequent rapid transit network. So it's a seamless network that transcends various modes, various operators, to provide a seamless, consistent, cohesive, coherent experience to people in the region with easy connections across modes. And we're introducing a new mode that scares a lot of people because there's a fear that it's watering down BRT. But in fact, it's a way to focus on making bus services more reliable without necessarily going to the extent that we went to on Highway 7 in New York region, that is widening the road and reserving the lanes exclusively for buses. Priority Bus is focused on the reliability of the service, the frequency of the service, but is flexible when it comes to implementation. If there is not tremendous traffic congestion, it can mean that there is no reserved lane, but in areas where there is congestion, there would be a reserved lane. Use of technology to provide signal priority, information technology at traffic signals, queue jump lanes, et cetera, et cetera. It's a much more flexible concept. So no plan is complete without its maps, and you can see the proposed 2041 network. A lot of the lines that you see in purple are actually priority bus routes, and in yellow is really the evolution of Go Bus service, which is a concept of frequent express regional bus, which are buses that travel long distances, fast but reliably throughout the region. The plan is also contains a section on goods movement. Peel region has been a leader in this area, and we have brought municipalities and industry around the table, and we plan to continue doing so and proposing a regional strategic goods movement network, really expanding the concept that Peel has pioneered, and lead discussions around, for example, urban deliveries as e-commerce becomes more and more important. So at the macro scale, as you're experiencing in Brampton with very large warehouses, and at the micro scale in neighborhoods. And again, it's really about building awareness and consistency throughout the region, recognizing that upper tier, lower tier municipalities and the province have the lead in this area because they control the road system. We also included a regional cycling network as well as a number of cycling actions in the plan. The regional commuter cycling network is not about a new idea that people would commute over extremely long distances, but making sure that cycling investments are coordinated among municipalities when it comes to design, crossing municipal boundaries, and enhancing access to GO stations, for example. So in the end, if the plan that is proposed is implemented, we are looking at much more people and jobs being accessible by transit. So going from 9% of residents having access to frequent rapid transit to 36%, and 21% of jobs to 46%, even though the region stands to grow almost by 40%. The map here shows access. In deep purple are points on the map that have access to over 1 million jobs, and you can see that this really extends to a lot of the region, and you see a big improvement in Peel region, including Brampton. This is a very important slide, but not an area where we have a lot of solutions, rather an area where we have a lot of questions. As we become much more of a globally competitive, globally relevant region, do we have the right structures in place to make decisions, to have clear accountabilities, transparency? Do we have the right forums and tables to make decisions around transportation for the region? And same thing for the funding. Do we have the right funding tools? We have significant funding from the province for the next 10 years or so, over $30 billion committed. But what about the rest of the plan? What would be appropriate tools to fund the rest of the plan for municipalities, for the province, and how to involve the federal government, both for capital and operations? So again, as civil servants, we're not providing all the answers. These are answers to be provided by decision makers, but we are putting the questions on the table. So as a reminder, the plan is online. The formal consultation period closed on Friday, and we thank the City of Brampton for its very detailed and very well-considered report that we have started analyzing in close detail. And as I said, we're going to our next Board of Directors meeting in December, and we will do our best to consider comments as they come in. So that concludes my presentation. Apologies again to those who have heard it before, and I welcome your questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Dillon.
Mine's to the staff.
Yours is to the staff
Yes.
report. Do you have any questions?
No,
of
I
the
don't.
Delegation?
No.
Okay.
Thank you for your...
Councillor Bowman?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Just on the slide where you had the key draft 2041 RTP deliverables.
Yes.
When
Just
you're
for committee's reference.
7.2-12 in our report. The numbers that you've got there within walking distance to frequent rapid transit, huge changes.
Yeah.
Now, is that based on each of the municipalities in the region's master plan as to where development and business commercialization is going to happen, like in our case along the Queen Street corridor? Or is that just predictive based on what you've seen in the past since 2008?
Thank you very much for your question. Through the chair, it has been a technically challenging exercise. As you know, the province released its growth plan last year with growth targets at the upper tier level. But in order to prepare the plan, we need to go to what we call the traffic zone level. So these are 3,000 zones in the region. So we brought in Henson, that I'm sure Council is familiar with, to help us allocate, for the purpose of our analysis, that growth to all areas of the region. And then we work closely with municipal staff to make sure that our assumptions were valid. So it's a lot of science and a little bit of art.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is that it's not necessarily new routes and new modes of transportation that you're putting on. It could, in fact, be, for instance, on our Queen Street corridor, the fact that there's going to be intensification along that corridor that we already have a Zoom route on, or a BRT or whatever.
It's very much both. A land use strategy and a transportation strategy that both advance in lockstep is really the holy grail that we're trying to accomplish, both at the provincial level and at the local level. And so we anticipate that with investment in the right places, it is both the new enhanced services that Brampton actually has been working on for a number of years and intensification on the right corridors.
Okay. And finally, I don't know if I saw it here, maybe it is here, but moving towards battery or solar-powered vehicles, is that in the future? Do you have numbers on what % of the total transportation may be in that mode?
Thank you very much for your question. There is, in section number 5, mention of the provincial target of reducing emissions by 80% by 2050. There's many factors to reducing emissions. One is land use, reducing trips, and then there's mode shift, and then there's technological change. These are both very much under the purview of both the federal government and the provincial government. So we continue to work with the province on this, but it's very much under their purview. But we felt that we really needed to mention it, the need to green both the public fleet, so the transit fleet, acknowledging that it takes resources, and the private fleets as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Sparvier, is your question of the delegation?
Is it?
Or the staff report? And actually, we can bring forward the staff report, but we'll...
Kind of related.
It's kind of related. The delegation may be able to answer. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Anton, nice to see you again. Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Ça va?
You make them feel at home, you know, right?
Yeah. I'm home here too.
Anyway, I have a question for you. You know what transpired here in Brampton with the Main Street LRT issue. You're very familiar with all the drama that occurred here. Are you familiar with that?
Well, I've definitely heard that there were lively discussions, passionate discussions.
There certainly was. Can you tell us whether, with the direction at council when not following the provincial, basically what the province was looking for, we kind of diverted from that. Do you know if there's an attitude now that's been left with the province, with Brampton looking for a different route to get to the GO station? Is the province still hoping that that will happen in time? Are they really counting on that connection to happen? Because I see on the map in the staff report, there's an orange line on Main Street, Ontario. That could be either LRT or it could be the BRT. It could be one or the other. So, do you know if the province is still has a preference of the LRT?
In fairness, Councillor Sparvieri,
Yeah.
I don't think that the gentleman, Antoine, can speak on behalf of the province. What I can report,
Or Metrolinx, I should say.
well, Metrolinx is a separate entity from what the province might be thinking. I can report, as staff did at the Transit Council, is that Metrolinx have asked to have a seat at the table for the working group on the two alternative alignments. So they are at the table.
They want to be at the table.
Yeah, consistent with council's
Great.
resolutions.
Okay, good to hear. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you.
Mayor Jeffrey.
I thought that was going to get a lot more interesting. Okay, it didn't. Quick question. In the report, it speaks to the development of a frequent rapid transit network. And in the draft regional transportation plan, it upholds the commitment to provide two-way all-day GO rail running every 15 minutes to Bramalea, downtown Brampton, and Mount Pleasant stations on the Kitchener line. I believe it's running right now to the Bramalea station. The other two stations, I don't know that we're on a 15-minute. So is that a commitment to the future, or is that? Can you provide any clarity on that?
Thank you. It's definitely an improvement over what exists today. Now you have two-way all day, but it's definitely not as frequent.
Yeah.
The changes that are contemplated to 2041 are actually related to the announcement that was made last year, that are contingent on an agreement with CN.
Okay.
Right now, as you know, the situation is more complicated between Bramalea and Mount Pleasant. So contingent.
So this is just a long-term commitment, right?
Yes,
Because
yes,
it says
is,
it's upholding the commitment, and that's the intention. It's an intention to do it.
Right. No, but I
2041?
believe that there's a commitment to, pending the agreement with CN, there's a commitment to constructing this, and then, and I would say there's been an RER plus announcement. So to have these enhancements, perhaps a little bit later than RER, but considered very much as part of the RER program.
It's very encouraging to see it there. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Dillon.
Thanks.
Turns out he has questions for you after all.
Yeah, well, I think they're for you. So if not, then I guess we can leave it for staff. So Appendix C, so I'll just read it. It says, the map depicting the proposed 2041 FRTN includes an LRT BRT line on Main Street in Brampton between Steeles and the Brampton GO. Goes on to say that it does not preclude the possibility of an alternative alignment, such as those currently being studied as part of the city's LRT extension EA. The fact that there's been a pause in riders directly reaching Brampton GO from Steeles, how has that affected Metrolinx's the entire regional transit plan, or has it affected it at all? What is the effect?
Thank you for your question. You know, I think it's part for the course. Decisions get made, changed. You have a municipality to the south that has lively debates about a number of projects as well. So we're used to it. I don't have a scientific answer to your question, but I think we're very adept at working around local decisions, and it is really important actually that there be local buy-in to what we propose. We propose based on the best evidence, and then decision makers that make financial decisions then are ultimately responsible for deciding what gets built and when.
No, I guess you kind of just stated what has happened, but what is the overall effect? How has it changed Metrolinx's plans in terms of the connectivity for the region?
So if a different decision had been made, you would see a different line on the map, where I think we're as was stated, we're part of discussions, and then we're at this time letting city staff take the lead. But I'm not sure there's a regional impact.
So it's part of the regional transit plan, which is why I'm asking, because we want to have sure that there's connectivity. So I think there might be up to a 10-year gap as per our staff when all of our EAs are done, all the studies are done, and then we can have a shovel-ready project. So I just wanted to know, you don't have to answer, the reason why I asked was I wanted to know how it affected the connectivity, because this is all part of the regional connectivity plan. And again, this is another question. I'm not sure, I'm assuming it's to you. It says the draft RTP proposes enhanced roles for Metrolinx in a number of areas, reviewing secondary plans and large-scale planning applications, playing a leading role in development and redevelopment around stations, and developing a region-wide standard for highways, roads, and streets. So if Metrolinx has an enhanced role, for example,
Councillor Dillon, I'd like to for some clarification. This is the staff response to the Metrolinx document. What staff are identifying is what the draft RTF proposes.
Yes.
And staff's response to that is that the impacts of these planning processes and broader questions of jurisdiction will need to be considered in collaboration with the upper and lower tier.
No, I understand that, but I have a question based upon this, is that based upon these enhanced roles, will Metrolinx have the power to override or overrule any municipal decisions?
Thank you for your question. We are not being deterministic about how that would be implemented. We just know, and we've received the feedback frequently that throughout the region, observers have not seen as much activity as they would have liked to in terms of development or transit-oriented development at stations. So we are proposing a number of options, ideas to help facilitate development at stations. So, for example, we are, by our act, strictly limited to purchasing land for parking and for our very own operations. And sometimes it's even difficult to purchase a sliver of land for a path or a connection to a neighboring community. So we have had a number of conversations already with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and more particularly the Ontario Growth Secretariat, and they're helping us refine the language, especially since the situation with the growth plan has been so dynamic. The growth plan was just released in the summer to make sure that we complement their work in what they call major transit station areas. So I think staff's interpretation was correct, that there will be a number of conversations with staff on how we can best advance development at stations. We also heard, for example, from another municipality who said, you know, there's this great project across the street from the station. Could you incentivize it? Right now, we have no means of doing that.
So it's undetermined what these
Correct.
enhanced rule will be. Is that correct? Right
Yeah.
now, it's, I guess, advise and facilitate, but it could change.
Yeah. There's
going
also
forward.
OMB reform, as you know,
Right.
and that's also a bit of a unknown territory for everyone.
So it's undetermined.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
The last question I have is that the draft RTP goes, you know, talking about the big move, puts travelers' needs at the core of planning and operations. It says, you know, while existing commitments to transit infrastructure expansion will be fulfilled, and some new infrastructure projects will be advanced. The focus is on making the best possible use of transit and transportation assets. So I'm assuming existing projects and assets. And the focus is on making the best possible use of transit and transportation assets, on improving transit frequency, and on traveler experience. So essentially, from what I'm taking, is that Metrolinx is going to be focusing not on building new infrastructure, but enhancing the existing services we have. Where does, because we have two alternative routes being studied right now, where do these, you know, this potential connection to downtown fall under? Does it fall under, you know, existing, new infrastructure projects, or does it fall under, for example, improving transit frequency? Where does this fall under in terms of the focus for Metrolinx?
I think that's a really good question. We are, of course, and that's why we have Strategy 1, to emphasize that we are still very much committed to advancing and completing projects that are on the table. That includes projects that are in delivery and in development. Strategy 2, we identify a number of other projects. So we're not saying that our job is done. We're saying that still a lot needs to be built. The first big move is really all about the map and all about the projects, because very little had been built over the previous 30 years. So what we're seeing this time is that once a project is built, we can probably collectively do a better job in looking at fare and service integration. There's a number of instances where, for example, our GO schedules are not met by the local operators because they don't have the resources to meet every train. There are circumstances where passengers have to pay double fares across municipal boundaries. So to answer your question, because this project is not built yet, it's really part of building, continuing to build. But that doesn't make it any less important. We still have to build, but we also have to think about how all the pieces fit together.
So even though you know, the city deviated from what your original project was, there is still you know, has Metrolinx identified this, you know, getting to downtown? I guess it's called Brampton Gateway to Brampton Go now, as one of its priorities.
Thanks for the question. As far as I'm aware, nothing has changed from what was announced by our former CEO and the minister when it comes to the funding situation. So I believe that there's been a bit of reset, and now the emphasis on getting it right.
Right, so there's no funding that's been identified, but in terms of having this connection, in terms of, in regards to connecting the entire region, is that a priority, putting funding aside?
I would say that connecting projects to one another, connecting projects to UGC, so urban growth centers as designated by the province, or mobility hubs, which is our own designation, it definitely is a strong consideration in advancing projects.
Right, and I got one last question. When we talk about, actually, you know, I think this is best answered by staff, so I'll save it for the next.
See no more questions for the delegation. Would someone like to move or see? Councillor Willens, all those in favor? Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Madam
Councillor
Chair.
Bowen has brought forward report 7.2, so now is the time if there's any questions specific to the report from members of committee. Councillor Dillon.
Thank
If
you.
you could make reference to the page numbers as you go through
Seven
them, that
point
would be helpful.
7.2-3. Sorry for not indicating earlier. The third paragraph, the one in the middle, from the bottom. Sorry, it speaks about the development of an FRTN is central component of the draft RTP. And it says priority bus services from an interconnected system that will allow people to travel quickly and seamlessly. So the priority bus, it states, is a bus transit service running fully or partially on a semi-exclusive right-of-way and using transit priority measures, et cetera, et cetera. Can you give us an example of what this is or what it will be? Like specifically to Brampton?
So without, through you, Madam Chair, without bouncing the question back to Antoine, we're actually asking that question as well. From what we understood in the draft RTP, an example of existing systems that have similar features to Priority Bus is something like Viva and Zoom currently. So be that as it may, I think our question was just how do the features that are defined for Priority Bus, how do they differ from what we currently have with our Zoom service? That was a question that we put in our report and that we're hoping that Metrolink staff can clarify before December.
So would a priority bus be, for example, like when you go down the 4-3, I think on the side that Square One is on, they have that dedicated lane. Is that a priority bus?
That's actually a dedicated BRT, so that's high level, complete segregation of the running way. I think just to echo what Antoine had said earlier, was that the priority bus would include features of like prioritization features to enable the frequency of the transit service where it's needed in order to get through congestion. So you may have parts of a route that would be running in some kind of a dedicated running way, but it wouldn't be exclusive to the entire route. So that's our understanding to this point, but we're hoping that we'll get some additional clarification.
Thanks for your answers. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you. Just following up on Councillor Dillon's question, the high occupancy vehicle lanes, are they being considered as part of the transit lanes? So for instance, a transit bus, a Zoom bus, for example, could go for a certain number of kilometers, reach a high occupancy vehicle lane, switch into that lane, and then switch back over at some point?
Through you, Madam Chair, again, without trying to read into the Metrolink's plan, the plan does include actually a proposed HOV network. To me, it would make sense that if that network were part of your grid, that HOV would certainly be able to accommodate transit vehicles and provide that additional transit prioritization.
Okay, and the Zoom service that we have is other than occupying its own lane, very, very close to a BRT service, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, the current Zoom service is what I guess the industry tends to refer to as BRT Lite. So it has prioritization at intersections, queue jump lanes, signal prioritization. Albeit, I mean, other vehicles can benefit from that same prioritization, but it's the level of service and the customer experience, I think, that distinguishes the Zoom service from the conventional service. And to move up to a higher order of BRT is really the improvements in the running way to be able to provide the frequent headway.
Okay, and the BRT still runs between Gateway and Go, correct?
The current?
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
So there's connections. It's connected.
There is a service today that the Zoom 502 runs on Main Street from the GO station down to Square One.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Bowman, would you like to move the Oh, I'm sorry, you snuck on there, Councillor Gibson. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question. I guess it's a transit question. Where's our highest usage in transit right now? What is it Queen Street?
We do have transit staff here. Madam Chair, they're probably better qualified to answer those statistical questions.
Welcome, Doug.
Thank you for the question. Through you, Madam Chair. The highest ridership quarter right now is our Queen Street quarter, but we do have significant growth on most of the Zoom quarters as well.
I'm assuming Bouvard's starting to grow pretty good too.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. No, I just heard the other day that Queen Street was by far our highest, so I just wanted to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman has moved the report and the recommendations. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Okay, members of committee will move now to staff presentations. A copy of the presentation has been handed out and it is in reference to 7.3. And the presentation will be done by, I'm just looking for the sheet that you gave me, Mr. Clerk. Daniela Ballasal.
Right up here. Can you see this little icon behind my finger? So if you can X that out. Okay. Yeah. Okay. That works. I have to move on it. I have to run it, right? Yeah, you're gonna go to okay. Thank you.
Hi, welcome Danielle.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of committee, and Madam Mayor. My name is Daniela Ballasal. I'm a policy planner with the Planning Department, and my presentation today will be on the development of a framework for Brampton's affordable housing strategy entitled Housing Brampton. So why the need for a housing strategy? Well, to ensure a high quality of life for all, the city understands that a range of housing types and tenures is necessary to meet the varying needs of its residents. Housing affordability continues to be a challenge for many. This is why a Made in Brampton approach is necessary, a comprehensive vision and plan to address housing affordability challenges faced by our residents. To develop an effective strategy, consideration must be made to federal and provincial housing programs. The release of the National Housing Strategy is imminent. It's actually expected this Wednesday on National Housing Day. It's speculated to be released this Wednesday. And that strategy is also backed by a federal investment of $11 billion earmarked in the 2017 budget for affordable housing over the next 11 years. At a provincial level, the new Ontario Fair Housing Plan is the province's 6-point action plan to improve livability for Ontarians. And the province recently released a further 14-point action plan to bring new housing to market quicker. And this aligns with recent improvements implemented by our own planning department to streamline the approvals process. At a regional level, the service manager, Region of Peel, continues to implement its mandate of its respective housing plan and its affordable housing strategy. Okay, locally, our 2016 to 2018 strategic plan supports the creation of affordable and accessible units, while our official plan will need to be updated to bring our affordable housing policies into conformity with provincial plans as part of our proposed work. In terms of defining affordability, per the growth plan and the provincial policy statement, rental and ownership housing is deemed to be affordable if it does not cost more than 30% of a household's pre-tax income. The city's role in addressing affordability differs from that of the region. Given the city's jurisdiction over land use planning matters under the Planning Act, our strategy will focus on the creation of rental as well as affordable ownership units. Whereas the Region of Peel is a local housing authority and service provider, it administers various programs such as the rent geared to income and rent subsidy programs. As for our current context, to date, the city has registered a total of 284 second units under its new registration program. while 3,250 Brampton households were on Peel Region's centralized wait list in 2016. Okay. This particular slide, it's difficult to see. It shows that the average shelter cost for those who own their own homes was $1,869 in 2016 compared to monthly average cost for renters of $1,225 per month. Now, I can also make note that in 2016, the census showed that 33% of residents in Brampton spent more than 30% of their income on shelter. This particular slide shows the housing continuum, which ranges from homelessness on the left end, or the far left end, and that goes through to market ownership on the other end of the housing spectrum. So our proposed housing strategy will primarily focus on the creation of rental and affordable homeownership, given the city's authority with respect to land use planning matters. Some of the housing work we've done to date includes implementation, as I alluded to earlier, the second unit's registration program, as well as the ongoing seniors housing study, which seeks to identify suitable sites for seniors housing across the city within the city's built-up area, in areas that are adjacent to existing services and amenities, so well-served areas of the city. Also, through representation on the FCM's Big Cities Mayor's Caucus, the city has and continues to advocate for a national housing strategy with funding commitment. This strategy will be formed around the following four themes. The first being to increase the supply of affordable housing. Second, establishing policies and initiatives that encourage housing diversity across the city, followed by effective engagement, communication, and advocacy efforts, plus monitoring and measuring success of the strategy. Our work will also look at seeking to align with the planning vision, as well as our current urban centers work underway. The following is an overview of the proposed work program. Phase 1 includes endorsement of this proposed framework, as well as best practices, a housing needs assessment to determine our actual housing need at the local level, as well as preserving rental housing stock. Phase 2 will start in Q3 of 2018, which will include updating our official plan policies to permit second units within accessory structures such as granny flats. And then we also know that right of entry concerns continue to be an issue for the city, as well as the presence of illegal second units. However, a dedicated task force is being proposed for 2018 to mitigate such issues, and this will be separate from our housing work. Also under Phase 2 will be the need to address student housing given the future university here in the city, as well as identifying tools and incentives to promote affordable housing, which includes inclusionary zoning under Bill 7. Phase 3 will take us into Q3 2019, and we'll focus on community engagement, finalizing the actual strategy, as well as its implementation. We are also proposing that a technical advisory committee be established to lead the development of the strategy, and we are recommending the following agencies participate in that committee. So representation from the development industries, such as BUILD, also representation from the not-for-profit sector, such as Habitat for Humanity, service providers such as the faith community and cooperative housing providers, financial institutions, Region of Peel staff, CMHC, as well as a member of council. As for next steps, staff is seeking the endorsement of this proposed framework, along with the work program and the associated timelines for Housing Brampton. And moving forward, we will report back to Council upon completion of Phase 1 deliverables in the second quarter of 2018.
Thank you, Daniela. I've got a few speakers on the board. Councillor Fortini.
Thank you, through the chair. Thank you, Daniela. Where it says here to date, the city has registered 284 units, second units, under the new registration program. I don't understand what the new program is. Is there a new program now?
No, the existing. Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. That's under the second units registration program that was implemented in 2015.
Right. It says here,
What page are you on, Councillor Fortini?
7.3.4.
Okay.
The city recognized the importance of the second unit because of the low lack of rental housing stock. In 2015, 2014, when we did a workshop, we were told a second unit is requirement. As I've been going around, and people's been calling me, there's things added there that we have never talked about, like an air duct circulation, a choker over the furnace, you need insulation on the ceiling. All these, so are we providing basement apartments or we're providing condos? Because I don't get all these extra things added as we went along, and a lot of the people trying to register for a basement apartment are spending $30,000, $40,000 and said, I should have never started. So really, when we're short so many of these housing, we have to make it easier. And when we have a shower valve, they don't qualify unless they're over 5.4 meters. We make them start everything. So at the end of the day, how can we approve these basements?
Councillor Fortini, it's a little outside the scope of this report, but...
Well, it says here second
Rick
units.
Kennard, I understand, but that's part of the policy moving forward, so Rick Kennard is here, and he's eager to respond.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor Fortini, the items that you're speaking of are in place through provincial legislation, so through the Ontario Building Code Act and regulations. Things like the automatic shut-off to the gas valve on the furnace, those are regulations, as I said, that are put in place by the province. So we don't have any control over whether or not they're whether or not we choose to implement them. We must implement them. So those requirements aren't something that's changeable from a municipal standpoint. However, you are quite right. There is a lot involved in creating a second unit where you have a single family detached or a semi-detached, and you want to add a second unit. So all of these regulations that are put in place by the province have recently been reconsidered. And when I say recently, in July of 2017, there were amendments to the Building Code Act that contemplated ways to make it easier for residents to convert existing units. So there have been certain, what's the word I want to use? There have been certain flexibilities put in place as of July of last year. So July of this year, I should say, sorry. So we should see an uptake. We have had over 1,200 applications for registration. Only just under 300 have gone through the process to completion. So you should see that pick up a little bit more over the coming months with some of the relaxations of the building code requirements that have been put in place, as well as some of the relaxations of the registration requirements that we put in place in the spring of this year through policy planning's work. So I expect that over the next few months you'll see that number significantly increase.
Thank you. But one more question. I was at a residence that you built a brand new home, 5 years old. Now they put a kitchen downstairs. The rough-in, when the house is being built, who passes a rough-in? Our plumbing?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. If the rough-in was done at the time of the original construction, then we would have inspected it as part of that permit. If it wasn't proposed as part of the original construction of the house, then it would have to be covered under a subsequent building permit.
Building permit.
And inspected by the building division, yes.
Okay, so then he would need a second permit if he had to put a sink in there, a kitchen, even though the plumbing there was done by the developer.
Yes, quite frequently what we see, we haven't seen too many kitchens roughed in. We see a lot of bathrooms roughed in the basement. That's a fairly common thing, and the plumbing of that type of work is inspected at the time of the construction of the original home. We've spoken to the building community, and to date, not too many have taken up the task of creating an apartment-ready new home. So there is opportunity there for the building industry, but to date that hasn't been something that has had a lot of interest.
Okay.
Usually the plumbing underground and everything is always inspected when the house is being built. So if there's a rough-in, there's always a rough-in. So, yeah. Okay, and the second one here, where it says which provides low-income housing for grant from the City of Brampton in partnership with Region Appeal. Do they have to start that before the construction or after the construction to apply for the grant?
Through you, Madam Chair. I'm not intimately familiar with all of the requirements of the regional grant program. However, one of their requirements is that a permit is issued from the city prior to being approved for the grant. So I know that the region has to be a part of the application process from the beginning. They need to make an assessment of the existing conditions of the basement to know that it meets the criteria that the region has set in place for the grant. Subsequent to that, they have to apply for and receive a building permit from the city, and then all of the inspections from the city have to be passed, and we have to grant occupancy in order for that grant to be issued.
Yeah. Okay, because it did say 58 people did receive, families, but if you go to page 7319, 25 applications were only for existing units. Existing, that means they were there, so they decided to renovate and they got the grant.
Through you, Madam Chair. That, so I've had a lot of conversation with the region about that, and to be honest with you, that is really the wording that has been chosen by the region. It does not actually mean that there's an existing basement apartment or a second unit in the house. It means that the basement is a finished unit with a bedroom and a kitchenette, but not that it has been approved for use as a second unit. So there's a little bit of confusion around that wording, but essentially their terms of an existing second unit do not mean that it's actually been approved as an apartment, but that it is a finished basement with those criteria in place.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Patino. Thank you. Mayor Jeffrey.
Thank you, Daniela. Is this the first affordable housing strategy the city has ever put forward? Is it?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes it is.
Okay. So I'm not here to shoot the messenger. One of the things that challenges me, and even at the region, and because I know the region does the vast majority of this blue line, and we do the end of the blue line, is that one of the things that Region Appeal is really good at is collecting data. They're experts. We don't actually get things done until council kind of tells them to go do it. So a great example is the homeless shelter. We had, I think, 2 reports on that day that essentially said we should study this some more. And we had no place for homeless youth in the city of Brampton. Every single one of those youth had to go to another city to get a roof over their head. So I guess my challenge is I can keep reading these reports and I can keep reading that we're positioning ourselves for the future, but I actually don't see anything really specific. So I'm not trying to shoot the messenger. I'm just saying I want some specifics, and I think actually the city of Brampton can do a lot more. I think we can make it policies that when lands become vacant, that the first thing we think about is that we consider how affordable housing could be put on that property, or that would only be offered to people building affordable housing. Maybe that's something that'll come out of the technical group. I'd love us to start thinking about how to make co-op housing be more successful in the city again. Co-op housing used to be, back in the 80s, something CMHC worked very hard on. I don't know how we can do this without federal provincial programs. So the strategy is going to give consideration to federal housing programs. We've got to do more than give consideration. We need to go out and chase them to see what programs we can be part of and how we can turn this around. Because, to be honest, this is a very modest entry into the affordable housing conversation. We're catching up. Other municipalities are years ahead of us and are doing things that are practical and will make a difference. So I want us to do something practical. I want us to put policies in place that have us think about how to use pieces of property differently, how to engage those partners, how to be much more proactive in our advocacy on this affordable housing strategy. Just because there's so many people, so many families out there that are waiting years in order to get affordable housing. And we all know what a difference it makes to our communities. This is only going to get worse. It's only going to get harder. And I feel like we need to accelerate this more quickly. The work strategy and the timelines are very modest. we got a university coming. And we have a building community out there that does not want to build rental housing. They're not interested in it, and the province is not interested in providing any wiggle room on rent controls, because I've already raised this at the big city mayors, saying, you know, I've got a builder who is at Shoppers World, and he thinks rent controls are going to prevent him from making a profit, so he's not interested in building them. So we're stuck in the middle. We still have the problem. We have people living here who need a place to live that's affordable, that they may not necessarily need to buy or can ever afford, but they still need housing, and we want them to live in our city, and we want those different types of housing forms to be in our city. And the reason I talked about the co-op housing is that it's a mix. It's a mix of market value and certainly geared to income homeowners. And that's what you want in your city. You don't want enclaves of people who all have the big houses and people who can only afford the houses that are more affordable. You want that mix of neighborhoods. It helps us cross those barriers. It helps us build a city that's stronger. So I'm all for this. I'm in. I'm good. But I guess I want you to be more aggressive. I'd like us to just push the envelope a little bit. I'm hoping the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee is in phase 1. It doesn't actually say in here, but I'm hoping it's early and that we can start strategizing about how we can get our federal and provincial partners to be partners in building some great projects. I've seen them across Ontario in my former life. I know it's possible. It really helps if you have somebody who's a go-getter on your council, whether it's municipal or regional. There's some go-getters around this table that I think could really be great champions on this file. I guess this to me is very modest, safe. I want you to stop being safe. This is really important. We got a lot of families that are really struggling, and if we can just do something braver, I want to do that. I know we can. So thank you for the report. It's not a criticism. I'm in. I want to be helpful. But we got to move this faster because there's too many families that are waiting. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bowman.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the report. I don't think it's telling us a lot of stuff we didn't already know, especially about the city of Brampton here, where we've got, you know, so many illegal rental units. We've got to find a way to make them legal, to make them safe for the people who are living in those units. But that's, again, as Mayor Jeffrey says, that's only part of the problem that we've got. We need to get a lot more rental units going in this city. But I just wanted to ask, as part of the recommendations, if this all passes, there is going to be an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee, and I'd like to put Councillor Fortini on that committee because he seems to know so much about the housing, about the costs, about the permits. So when it does pass, he's got my vote to be the council rep on that committee. Thanks.
Councillor Miles.
Thank you. This is definitely a step in the right direction. But I think, as the mayor said, is we have to be braver as a council. How many times do we have applications that come before us for intensification in our wards where we get outcry from the community and we as council stop the application? I mean, the intensification on Queen Street is a really good example where the Manly development, and the community didn't like the fact that it was going to be rental, not condo. They got up in arms, and it took a while. Like, it's one thing to say yes, it's another as a council. We got to stand up for what we believe in, and there's a lot we as a municipality can do. We've done it in the past. We've had developers build houses that had granny flats, 2 units within one. In some cases, they were convertible. So you could buy a house, you could convert part of the house into a second unit if you wanted, or you can live in the whole thing. There's lots of things that we as municipalities that we can do, but we have to be willing to do it. So a lot of that is going to be looking at, in some cases, if there's an interest in developing a rental unit, we need to have a
Expediter.
expediter. We're working on it. So it's not just, we're not just saying what we're going to do, we're actually doing it. Caledon has done something where developers are given a little bit more intensification and they're getting lots to build affordable housing through Habitat Through Humanity. I am the president of the Peel Housing Corporation. I'm happy to serve on the Technical Advisory Committee. I think you need the linkages because at the Region of Peel we're made aware of who's out there, what developers are wanting to or interested in building affordable housing. Most of them are looking at some kind of partnerships. The City of Brampton might want to look at if there's a good location, providing some city-owned land in order to make it happen. It can't just be lip service, so I'm assuming that this Technical Advisory Committee is going to come up with a long list of actual action steps that we can take, but at the end of the day it's going to be up to council to say yes or no, and those are not going to be easy decisions because, for heaven's sakes, in our communities people don't even want townhouses. For some reason they see townhouses as not being an attractive way to live, and for the most part they're amazing. So thank you. And you know what, I've been on council 30 years next year. This is the first time Brampton has said we're going to have an affordable housing strategy. Up until now it was always that's the region's responsibility, and even when we were working with Habitat for Humanity we would always get a staff recommendation that said no, don't give them the land, and council in fact would turn around the recommendation and say yes, this is what we need to be doing in order to provide more affordable housing. So good on you. I think it's great. I hate waiting forever, as the mayor said. I hate waiting too. If we're going to get things done, we're going to have to get things done, and we're going to have to think out of the box, and we're going to have to break some of the rules. And some of the rules may be in areas of conversion, it may be in areas of intensification, but if we're serious, we need to get serious and we need to get these things put in policy. And every single application that comes forward that has the potential to meet the goals of affordable and marketable needs to be highlighted at the top of the report. So it's got to be a priority. So if it's a priority, then I'm happy to serve on the committee and be the link between the regional housing. And Councillor Moore also serves on that committee as well. So as chairman of planning, there should be lots of great linkages. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Councillor Miles, and I 100% agree with you. We have to walk the talk around here. We cannot be, every time we have one or two people in the audience going against a staff report for rental housing. And that's what we've done recently. So we have to grow up a bit, sometimes do the hard thing and tell people in the audience they're wrong. What we really need is a campaign to educate people on why we need affordable housing. Because people don't know. We hear all the time from people, we want to tax basement apartments. Well, we can't do that. And how many times do we have to say we can't do that? Province won't let us do it, and I'm not saying they should, but we cannot do that. Yet we constantly hear from people saying the exact same thing all the time. We have to make them safe. That's our responsibility. I personally think that it is a regional responsibility for affordable housing. That doesn't mean that there isn't things that we can do, though, to help them with that. What we cannot do is the City of Brampton doing one thing. Mississauga had a whole campaign on it of affordable housing last year down there, and Caledon doing something, and then the Region of Peel doing something. We got to be working together on all this, and I think that's what staff have been saying anyway here. Anyway, ever since I've been on 27 years on council next year, and I have taken a lot of grief from people because of my thinking philosophy on affordable housing and rentals and stuff. I live in a townhouse, and yet I have people in the audience yelling at me, people live in townhouses, they're bad. You guys have been around for a while. I've heard them say that, and I took offense to one of them one day. you know, I'm in a condominium townhouse, doesn't mean townhouses are bad. I took on a whole area on townhouse area one time. I wouldn't, in the election, Councilman Moore can tell you, I wouldn't even go near the area in that election because people hated me so much. But they now know that I was right because they see what they had in front of them. Instead of a factory that could have 50 trucks a day going through them, they've got townhouses in front of them. Downtown, we took on, Councilman Moore and I took on a whole residents association with one of the gentlemen who used to be here quite a bit telling us what we should and shouldn't be doing. And we built a rental. 2 rentals, actually, 2 buildings attached together. We can't sit there and keep touting that we need affordable housing and then vote when somebody comes in with rentals. So, you know, we do that all the time here. We've got to look at each other and say, you know, really, let's do the right thing. And the right thing is you have to have a combination of a lot of different things. And rentals are part of that. Townhouses are part of that. Basement apartments, fortunately or unfortunately, are part of that. There's nothing wrong with good basement apartments, good, safe basement apartments. And I think that the tax thing, well, it's just what it is. We just can't deal with that. But, you know, I hear council members talking all the time about, you know, what we should and shouldn't be doing, yet they vote against it. So, calling you out, I guess. I'm calling those people out who voted against the Madden project. A perfect example. Perfect example. Same thing happened on the Hanson Road one. At one point, there was talk of not allowing that one to go. That was a building that was specifically done to house people from SHIP. Yet there were some people who didn't want to do that on Queen Street corridor. So, well, you know, we spout these things off. Let's look ourselves in the mirrors and say, you know, who's stopping them from happening? It's certainly, you know, what you wonder why developers don't want to come to Brampton to build rentals or townhouses or something like that, because we give them a grief.
Okay. Move the chair be heard. A few comments I'd like to make. There was a report came to planning committee early in my tenure, early 2000s, I would say, that recommended granny flats. Remember conversion, laneway flats, converting garages to, I think without exception, everybody went sideways. But we were right in the middle of the basement apartment issue. And we were all dealing with property standards issues, parking issues, bad tenancy issues related to basement apartments, and staff brought forward a report that talked about laneway houses and adding more intensification, so it wasn't well received. So I can understand why staff were maybe reluctant to sort of jump into the fray again, so I think it's good that this is before us. I want to comment on the basement apartment issue and to sort of build off of Councillor Fortini's comments. There should be, I don't know what we do for those folks and how we advertise it out there when they want to actually legalize their unit. There should be no surprises. We're really good at listing all of our criteria. Here's the checklist of all the things you need to meet from the municipal level. But then there's these non-negotiable, out of our hands kind of added costs that, you know, when people go through the checklist, they put a value on it and say, well, it's going to cost me, you know, $15,000, it's going to be worth it, I'm going to do it. And then they discover that there's these other things that they have to pay for. I think what we need to, if we don't do it now, we need to be really transparent to those out there who may want to, so that they may at the end of the day choose not to, or they may choose to do it. But at least if they choose to do it, they've got a better understanding of what it's actually going to cost. It's not the $15,000, it's really $25,000, because when you add these non-negotiables on it that we have to manage and require, but that we don't have any control over. Just, you know, 2 checklists. Here's from the provincial or from a regulatory perspective we have no control over, non-discretionary, and here's ours. So we make it more people to the table or not, but I think word travels pretty quickly. If you owned a number, and we know that there's some landlords that own several homes in the city, and so they go through the process to do one. They're not doing the rest of them if they thought it was going to be 15 and it ended up being 25. So I think there's a way to maybe help them through that. And the other comment I want to make, and the region has made this decision, or not the region, but I think it was at Housing, Councillor Miles, where we're looking at our existing inventory of regionally owned multi-residential, and how can we intensify the properties. A lot of them have above-grade parking. A lot of them are on very generous lots where there is room for more towers or more housing on it. So the region's going through that process. I've also had conversations with 3 different large property owners, or well, I should say, I guess they're in the business of owning large rental stocks. And they're not just Ontario, but across the country. One of them has bought an apartment building, a multi-residential up on McMurtry Avenue, with a large surface parking lot. And they've bought it specifically so that they can intensify that property. I think that there's an opportunity for us to approach some of these owners and say, or the owners of the existing older inventory stock, about how do they intensify their site to add inventory of rental properties across the city. They're in areas where the infrastructure is already there. The sewer water mains are there, the schools are there, the recreation centers are there. They may not be specifically along the Queen Street corridor, but they are certainly in close proximity to. There are even rental or condominium properties in the city of Brampton that are on large footprints, and they're looking at how do they double up the intensification of their own site, and they are along the Queen Street corridor. So I think there's a way for us to get ahead of the curve so that we can, if this, and I think it is going to become a trend because it's the value of the land and the cost of the land that is prohibitive in many cases. So if we can put together a concierge, an expediter for those kinds of properties where I think we're going to see a lot of that across the city, whether it's on McMurtry, whether it's along the Queen Street corridor, whether it's down around Shoppers World. Any multi-residential building in the city of Brampton that has a large surface parking lot is a prime candidate for intensification. Commissioner Elliott.
If I may, through the chair, we are in the midst of actually recruiting facilitators into the planning department. I see these as keen projects. I hadn't really contemplated being proactive in terms of an outreach program to identified property owners, but certainly something we would contemplate through the working group. However, expediting or facilitating applications that provide affordable housing is certainly in my eyes as a priority for the city as well. So I would anticipate these new staff to work on these projects that would bring affordable housing or creative affordable solutions to the table. So I think we've got one step in our process. As I said, the other thing I want to make clear is that we're not going to do a year and a half worth of work through this program and then deliver a bucket of goods. As things are implementable through this process, we would make sure to bring them to the table. So this is not a waiting game for a year and a half. There's certainly things that we will be able to roll off the table as we feel comfortable doing so.
Terrific, thank you. Councillor Fortini.
Yes, one more last comment. Thank you. To Chair Moore here, if we make it easier, I'm looking at these basement apartments, and I've gone to hundreds, and I know I'm a little bit frustrated when I see HVAC inspectors, plumbing inspectors. Are we creating condos, or we're giving them an easy route here? Because he's got a kitchen. Come to my house. I have a pool table, bar, whatever. I fall asleep there. I fall asleep in the basement. A fire still could happen just because I don't have that stove there. So why don't we allow every builder to put the HVAC system in, or the sprinklers in the furnace room, or the choker over the house? Just on those 4 things, it's $15,000. That's without $3,500 permits. That's 20 grand. So if we make the permits a lot easier, they will register. And like Councillor Gibson said, once they do a registration, their taxes will go up. Then they actually on the census cards will be filled in, and we don't lose money on the tax credit because it goes by population. We're losing millions of dollars just to get 284 apartments. And then we want to create 6 more staff, a bylaw going around. So what are we doing? We're going to kick them out of Jeff's house to put them into my house? Because at the end of the day, they can't serve what they're serving anyway at the end. To spend another $850,000 of taxpayers' money.
Can you take that under advisement?
It is taken, thank you.
Thanks. Someone like to move the recommendations in the report? Councillor Bowman. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much, Daniela. And Rick, I bet you're glad you hung around, eh? Members of committee, we'll move now to item 7.1. We dealt with 7.2. We dealt with. We're now down to 9.1. I was correct. I'm going to ask the clerk to put the recommendation on the. Councillor Gibson, would you like to move this? Or it can be Councillor Bowman. It's in his area. Alan, do you want to speak to this just to remind everybody about the application?
Yes, definitely, through you, Madam Chair. So what we have in front of everyone on the screen is a draft resolution that is brought forward today to speak to a development application that is submitted with the city that has been with us for quite some time. Councillors should likely remember the application that was really referred to as the Kennedy Road townhouses, and these are the townhouse development application, which is a rezoning amendment application and an official plan amendment application, just for the lands really immediately across from the Powerade Centre. So there's lands there that are currently occupied by a single detached, really rural residential homes. Those landowners have banded together to put forward this application for the creation of 64 townhouses. Staff had brought forward a couple of recommendation reports previously, the last of which was in December 2015. Planning staff was recommending refusal of that application, but committee and council had supported it. There was a condition of approval that was approved tied to the application, which required that the golf course, the Brampton golf course, which is just immediately to the to the west of the site, that any possibility of safety concerns by way of errant golf balls that would find their way into the backyard of the proposed townhouses, that safety concern be mitigated, and it be mitigated to the satisfaction of both the Commissioner of Planning as well as the Brampton golf course. Since the time of the approval in principle of the application through that recommendation report, staff has met with the applicant as well as representatives of the Brampton golf course, and on several occasions. And staff has heard loud and clear through the applicant and the neighbor that they're not able to come to a resolution on the safety matter. Because that matter is not yet resolved, staff has not been able to come back with a zoning bylaw or official plan amendment due to the unresolved matter. This draft resolution in front of you would direct staff to prepare a report, come back to committee, and identify the status of the application. That's all.
Just for further clarification, the alternative is that the file go to the Ontario Municipal Board, and we would have to hire external planners and legal. Okay. Councillor Dillon?
To the chair, Ellen. This is the. Sorry, Madam Chair. This was added at the beginning. I come a little bit late. Was this emailed to us? Or did this just come on as an added?
It was added to the agenda today.
Right. So I don't know if I have. Just want to ask some questions because it's. I haven't had a chance to really look into it or delve into it too much. I do remember that it was. I guess there was a contentious debate around there. Staff was against the actual development, but council had approved the development, and there were a number of issues that staff had with the application itself. This addresses a safety issue in terms of the golf balls only?
So again, through you, Madam Chair. So the reason why staff has not been able to come back with a zoning bylaw amendment and official plan amendment is because one of the conditions, namely, that council had identified as needing to be addressed in advance of us coming back with a zoning bylaw amendment was that of the safety matter. And the safety matter had to be mitigated to the satisfaction of the Commissioner of Planning as well as the Brampton Golf Course, the neighbor to the west. And through meetings, we have determined that the neighbor and the applicant have not been able to resolve that matter. Hence, staff has not been able to come back with that zoning bylaw amendment.
So we're waiting on this issue to be resolved, I guess, in it to be worked out between the golf club and the applicant?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct, Councillor Dillon. We have been awaiting that, but it's at this point in time we have received some communications from the Brampton Golf Course as well as communication from the proponents of this application asking that Council reconsider some of the conditions that were associated with the approval. So with this draft resolution being passed, it would direct staff to prepare a report for committee's consideration, which identifies further background on these matters and could identify some potential ways forward.
So what were the other conditions that you mentioned, and why is this one the only that you guys have identified?
So through you, Madam Chair, it's the typical suite of conditions that really would have been applied through the recommendation report that was approved previously, such as the preparation and just adoption, approval of traffic reports, engineering reports, some design matters, and those are, I believe at this point in time, all completed.
So those have all been completed to staff's satisfaction, is that correct? A question, I don't know if it's related to this, is that does staff take into account now, because the application isn't completed, the surrounding area in terms of future development? Does that take a role in any of your decisions on this application, or is that a moot point?
So through Madam Chair.
Sorry, not a decision, but your process so far.
What staff are looking for is direction from this committee to explore any and all options and to have conversations with the parties to see how to move this application from its current stagnant condition.
Okay, so it's just to initiate some conversation regarding just the safety issue only.
So through you, Madam Chair. So staff will prepare a report, speak to the backgrounds further than what I'm speaking to at this point in time, so that all that information will be in front of committee and council, and committee and council can really decide at that point in time what you believe the best way forward would be.
Okay, so last question. This is brought forth by staff, is that correct?
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
This is brought forth by staff.
Sorry, once again?
This is brought forth by staff.
That's correct. Staff has been asked to provide this draft resolution forward for council's consideration so that you can consider it and look towards
Who
mitigating.
asked staff to bring it forth?
There is a request put through to myself from Councillor Moore.
Councillor Moore. I was contacted by the legal representative for this and had a subsequent conversation with Alan Parsons to see what were some of the options that might be available to staff to move this application from its current state. Because as I got clarification at the beginning, the alternative is an expensive OMB hearing. And I believed, as you do, with some of the changes, particularly with the application on the Amazon, and opportunities for that entire part of the world, that it's time to have a conversation to see.
If it's necessary?
Well, they have an application before us.
Right. So
that's going nowhere, one way or the other.
Yeah, and don't mean to belabor the point. So we're going to get all the information in an update as to this and the other conditions that they have to meet. Is that correct? And then council will make the decision then when your report comes. And there could be a subsequent OMB hearing, possibly.
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, council has already made a decision, an approval in principle on this application.
Right.
There is one outstanding condition that is identified here, and staff has suggested that there needs to be a further discussion to hopefully try and find a resolution or an alternative to ensure council's approval in principle can then proceed. Anything else, quite frankly, is a reconsideration of council's decision that they made in 2015.
So what's going to be coming back then to council? Like exactly? Because you said there's going to be a report outlining all the conditions. What are we going to be making a decision on?
So through Madam Chair, the report that I anticipate will be really put forward for your consideration will speak namely to the matter of the safety concerns and the one prior to zoning bylaw amendment condition that has not yet been satisfied. There will be as well some commentary in the report about the fact that staff had not been recommending approval of the application previously. It might speak to some modest background other than that. But what we can do is append the report that we had brought prior, which identifies all of the background and which really had culminated with our bringing forward a recommendation of refusal at that time, just so that all of the information can be in front of council.
So let's just say this doesn't get approved. What happens? Will they take the city to the OMB?
That is likely the case, through you, Madam Chair.
I was against this from the beginning. I don't think it was a good idea. I think it's even a worse idea now that we have possibilities on both sides down the road of Kennedy Road. I don't support this, and I never supported the application itself, so I'm going to vote against it, and I'm going to ask for a recorded vote too.
Okay. Councillor Miles?
Is mediation an option?
Through you, Madam Chair, staff had repeatedly sat down with both sides, really representatives of the Brampton Golf Course, as well as the applicant, and we really have seen in each of those cases that there wasn't really any middle ground from those sides. There always had been, I guess, certain principles maintained by one side or the other that they weren't able to budge on.
Is the answer no?
I believe that to be no.
You know what? We fulfilled our obligation as a municipality. We processed the application. We have made a recommendation. We've put in regulations that they have to meet. And as far as I'm concerned, we step back now, and it's up to the two parties to resolve it or take it to the OMB. I mean, we've done our work. Why are we creating more work for ourselves? If, in fact, you believe that we will not and never find a resolution to the matter, it's time to say, okay, that's what the process allows for, and let the process fall out. I know we try and resolve everything, Alan. I know you do try and resolve. But maybe it's time to say, okay, it's up to you guys. And this is what we require of you to do.
So perhaps what I'll just offer at this point in time, so as everyone, the council knows, staff have not been in support of the application. At this point in time, what is really on the table is an approval in principle that council had provided, subject to some safety matters being resolved. And if the matter goes to the OMB, then I see that the discussion at the OMB would be solely about safety matters. So provided that council is satisfied with really that being the crux of the matter at the OMB, and there being solely a discussion on safety, which might be approved or refused there, then anyways, just for everyone's understanding.
I think that's what I would recommend is let it be dealt with there, because we've done everything that we can do. I mean, the owner of the property is perfectly aware of what's been happening in the vicinity around it. I mean, if it was me, I might be rethinking what I wanted to do there. However, that's not our decision to make, and I think that, you know, at some point we just take the step back, and this is probably the time. So that's what I would recommend.
Councillor Gibson.
Through you, Councillor, through you, Madam Chair, if perhaps I can just also offer that, you know, if there is, I guess, an opinion of council that you would like to have some further consideration on this matter and not leave it to solely a discussion on safety, that if that was the case, then it would really be in council's best interest to ask staff to bring a report forward to a future meeting to bring this background forward again.
Okay, but you're precipitating your comments based on the fact of the decision, and I think council made its decision. It's a democracy. Decision was made, and we did our job the best that we could. We made the decision, and it's time for the process that is outlined in the Planning Act to take the next step, I think.
Councillor Gibson, you were on the board.
So
Sorry.
If I may, Madam Chair, so because we've heard various conversations here and some of the comments from Councillor Miles, there was a decision made by council in terms of the planning application that came before us previously. I understand that there are some conditions that cannot be satisfied, or at least that's what what Alan has mentioned to us, has come to us from the various parties out there. So there's a bit of a stalemate. And I've also heard the comments of Councillor Moore as well, in terms of, so how do we proceed, and perhaps we can have this come back to us with the additional information that you didn't have up until Alan providing you with this update, which may encourage council to maybe revisit the decision that was made previously. But that, having a report come forward for information purposes is one thing. Reconsidering the previous planning decision that was made is another, and procedurally there are a whole bunch of obstacles in the way. So I would just caution council in terms of being very, very clear in terms of what it is that you're trying to achieve with this report. Do you want to reconsider the decision that had been previously made due to the information that Alan has provided today? Or are you just looking for a report with that information, and then you'll make a determination at that future meeting as to which way you want to go? And if at that point you want to, consult with the clerk in terms of what would be required in order to revisit the previous decision, then you can go down that road at that point. But for today's purposes, I think what is being asked for is additional information. You can do that. So long as you're not asking for a reopening of the previous decision, which would require a special vote, I believe, then you can do so. I just caution you in terms of be clear in terms of what it is that you're asking us to do.
Councillor Gibson was on the board prior.
Yeah.
Somehow you got
that's okay. What this will do, what hasn't happened yet, is staff haven't come back and said to us, we're at a stalemate. Because we approved something and sent staff out to find out whether or not that one condition that the Brampton Golf Court had was feasible. If you recall, somebody asked, I can't remember who it was, the person who was up front there, whether or not any golf course had ever got, in any development around them, a condition like that size. And the answer was no. Nobody will, in their right mind, would ever give any golf course a total, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, indemnity for golf balls going in their backyard. That's what they said. That's what we were told. I can't remember who said it, but it was either staff or somebody there. I think it was somebody standing up in front of us. So I think I pretty much knew right from the bat, this would be coming back, because There's no way. Any development's going to take full responsibility for any golf balls that are getting in their backyards. Now, you do all the setbacks, you do all the things that go along with building around a golf course. But Brampton Golf Course was never going to get what they wanted. And my view is Brampton Golf Course has been talking about redeveloping their land for many years, and they're probably getting closer to that. Our land's worth a lot of money now. You got to remember, these people are all ownerships in their own. The members are ownerships in their golf course. If they were to sell those lands, they all would make quite a bit of money. That's not to say they shouldn't do that. I mean, it's good for them to do that. I don't know whether we want to revisit it or not, because if I look at what we've been talking about for those lands across the road, this application really, to me, fits in perfect for what they're talking about doing across the road. And you talk about what might be affordable housing at the end of the day, or high-end, real high cost, maybe it won't be, because it might be, if we were to get what we wanted across the road, it's probably going to be very high-end townhouses, very high-end. And if we get what we want across the road, we're going to need housing in that area, which there is no housing in that area. So to me, it fits in perfectly there. But for today's decision, I think we'd be smart to go along with this and let staff go back, and it gives them an opportunity to report back to us. They say, here's what we've done, here's what's, in this case, not happened, and here it is, council. Now you have all the information you need. And the conditions are what we need staff to report back to us on, and what if anything, they've had any movement on, which obviously I guess what we're hearing is none. But would they need to put that in writing? They need to report back to us. If they don't, it'd be irresponsible for us just to say don't do this, because they're going to be. It's very obvious they're going to be at the Ontario Municipal Board, and we won't have a choice. It's a council decision. Let's put out a lot of money to fight that. Council made that decision, so staff will have no choice but to fight, and we have no choice but to pay for that fight at the Ontario Municipal Board. So let's give staff an opportunity to report something back to us, and then we can decide where we go from there, would be my view.
Councillor Sprovieri.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I don't know if there's how much more you can report, but you told us today that the main problem is that the developer cannot safeguard or address the condition of the safety matter. So we know that. So I don't know whether there's more to it than that.
I think for clarification, the developer is not prepared to sign an indemnification agreement with the golf course that is satisfactory to both parties.
Okay. So I'm having a hard time understanding where we're going with this report. Whether staff is hoping that council will change our position, or whether staff is willing to relax the safety conditions. So it's one or the other. So it's either staff is prepared to relax the conditions, or you're looking at council to direct you to relax the conditions. I'm sure that staff, you're not going to be changing your position in any way. So am I correct in that you're hoping that we council may change our position or maybe direct you to relax the conditions?
I'd like to respond before, if you're okay with that, sure. Councillor Sprovieri.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important to understand why the resolution is here. I received a telephone call from the legal representative, as chair of planning, about the application to say that it was essentially going nowhere because of one condition that neither party could agree on. I contacted staff, who were very adamant that they were, committed to the conditions that were in the report. So my response to staff was, well then, what do we do in this case? Because if it goes to the Ontario Municipal Board, it will go with external planning, external legal, because obviously our own staff did not support the recommendation. So understanding that we'll end up at the board with an expensive and very costly OMB hearing, what are some of the options? If there is an option available that, staff want to look at, and I think we spoke, it's got to be 2 months ago, I said, how do we move the application off from where it is? I will leave it in your hands. If you see a way to do that, then bring a resolution forward. If you don't see a way to do it, then we go to the OMB. And this was the resolution that staff, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I need to own the fact that we had the conversation about this application and how do we move it from its current condition. It can't just hang out there forever. It will end up at the OMB. And what had happened and transpired since council made the decision, not just from our perspective, but for the applicant's perspective as well, was the Amazon bid. This, may provide an opportunity for that applicant to revisit their application, or not.
Well, with that then, through the chair, in relation to my question, and I understand the issue about an expensive OMB hearing, but I believe that before staff, if it does go to an OMB hearing, this matter will be brought to council as to whether council wishes to have any legal representation at the OMB to defend council's position or not. I believe it's optional. It's optional, is it not, as to whether we would hire outside legal or staff to represent council's position.
So through the chair to the councillor, whenever we get an appeal, we come to council with a report seeking instructions in terms of what position we're to take. So we would certainly do that. This would be no different.
Right.
That's the answer to your question. Yeah,
and I think that through the chair, I think council will have an opportunity at that time to have a full report on what's happened, what's transpired, and make a decision at that point as to whether we wish to attend the OMB and have representation. I don't really believe it's right for us to intervene or interfere at this stage to try to come up with a solution that will resolve the standoff between the golf course and the developer. I think that's their problem because it's a problem between the golf course and the developer, and I think we've done our job by saying that these conditions must be met, and if they cannot be met, then let it go to the OMB, and then council can take a position at that time as to whether we feel it's really prudent for us to have and spend money, taxpayers' money. So I don't really see why we have to intervene at this point in time, unless you're looking for council to change its position based on what's transpired and based on the Amazon situation, and I was one of the ones that supported the application because I believed, or I was led to believe, that the safety of the safety issue was being addressed, and if it is addressed, I don't see why the developer is not agreeing to the condition that the golf course wants. Obviously, and I know that in several cases in Ward 9 and 10, or Ward 10 anyway, there's been 2 golf courses that have been redeveloped, around, and homes were built, and they put conditions in there saying, in a purchase agreement, I believe that the golf course operators put conditions warning the people about possible golf balls falling in their backyards. So in this case, they can't do that because it's not a golf course proposal. It's another. So they can't get away from their responsibility. Whereas I know that Riverstone, when I represented the area, we had to pull teeth for the developer to put some nets around some people's homes because they were being I still have a whole pail, and I don't know if somebody wants them, I don't golf anymore, a whole pail of golf balls that the guy brought to my house, he picked out of his backyard. A whole pail. Good golf balls, too. So if anybody wants them, they're up for bid.
Should probably put them on the gift registry.
So anyway, I don't know what maybe staff can be a bit more clear as to what you're hoping to achieve by bringing a report to us, please.
If I may, through the chair, this direction would allow staff to look at alternatives to the condition that's in place today, right now. So that might look at different safety mitigations or obligations, but we can come back with some information about what that means in terms of risk to the city, liability, things like that. We might not recommend the other options, but at least you would be informed then of what other options may or may not exist to the city in this case.
Well, thank you for that, but I would think that you would already have something in mind already developed. If there was some other options, you probably would have told us here today and say, we believe there are other options and we can look at them and bring them back to council. But if you're going to look at, as I said before, relaxing the condition and then we end up with some serious injuries, then who's going to be held responsible is us right here, I believe. So,
sorry, through the chair, that's exactly what we'd like to explore. What are the alternatives? What risk does that put the city in, and what liability? So we need to convey this information back to council so you can understand and make an informed decision about that.
Well, I appreciate that, but I really question whether it's really necessary for us to do that at this time. I mean, it sounds like to me like we're trying to, or we're going to attempt to solve the developer's problems, and not the golf course problems, or a demand, or a requirement. That's what it sounds like to me. So, I don't believe we should be going there. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dillon.
I'd like to defer this to the next planning meeting, and with the indulgence, defer.
No, refer.
Defer to the next.
Speak to it if you defer.
I didn't say anything else.
Okay.
But I said with the indulgence of the chair, just
so there's a motion to defer this to the next planning committee. Okay. All those in favor of deferral? Oh, I'm sorry. Weren't you counting?
No, I don't count.
Okay, I'm sorry. All those in favor of deferral?
With the indulgence of the chair, can I explain?
Members of
why?
committee, a motion has been moved of deferral. It's non-debatable.
And I
The chair has called
apologize,
a vote.
I didn't count it. All those. All those in favor of deferral? 1, 2, 3. Opposed? 1, 2, 3,
1, 2.
4.
Can I see that? Can we see the hand again for opposed?
All those in favor? All.
No, but I want to just see who opposed.
Councillor Miles, Councillor Bowman, Councillor Willens, Councillor Gibson.
Fair enough.
Okay, Councillor Gibson.
Can I just, maybe I'm confused too. I think there's some confusion here. And it could be just me. The condition that we were talking about for the safety condition, wasn't it a condition that the Brampton golf course asked for? Not that staff had asked for, not that staff can be lenient on or waive. It was something the Brampton golf course asked for. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair. Chair. I can't recall the specifics at this point
Well,
in
let
time.
me put it this way, Alan. You guys didn't want to do this, so you couldn't have asked us to do it. You couldn't ask us to say, well, if you know, here's a condition to put in there. So it had to have come from the Brampton Golf Course, and I do recall it did, because somebody asked the question whether or not any other golf course had gotten this, and we were told no. It's just no developer is ever going to give a golf course total indemnification or whatever it's called of a condition like that. No golf course has ever got it. So that's a confusion. Staff can't go back and relax a condition that they didn't come up with. They can't. It's a matter of trying to negotiate something that obviously can't be negotiated right now, and so that's why I'd rather just have you guys be able to report back to us. Here's how it happened. Here's how many meetings we had, and we can't do anything now. It's in council's hands. If we don't change our minds, we're going to the OMB. Simple as that. Thank you.
Councillor Miles. Can Councillor Miles call the question when she's spoken on the matter?
A member can call the question when they have the floor, and then a majority vote to call the question, and after majority vote carries, those members who haven't spoken will be given the opportunity to speak. Councillor Fortini, Councillor Bowman, and Councillor Willens, and the chair have not spoken.
All those in favor of calling the question? That's carried. I don't know. Councillor Fortini, did you wish to speak on this? You do? No, Councillor Miles called the question.
But you voted for calling the question.
Am I still allowed to speak, am I?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Anybody who's not spoken on the matter can speak.
I just want a quick question. If the OMB is being dismantled in December, what's going to happen when we come back? I took a question from Jeff here since. They're talking about December, they might be dismantled?
So through the chair, I'm not aware of a total abolition of the Ontario Municipal Board. I know that there are changes coming to the board.
Come on.
I can't speak to what would happen if suddenly there was no appeal body for planning appeals.
Well, we hear
If presumably the Ontario Municipal Board through the chair was dismantled in its totality and not replaced with anything, then presumably you wouldn't be able to go anywhere with an appeal. The chances of that happening, I would suggest, are remote to none. But that's just commentary on my behalf.
Thank you. My understanding is anything application put in before December, because they're talking about dismantling the Ontario Municipality Board, they're allowed to put the appeal in. So you get a lot of the developers already put appeals in on applications that are here. Just in case it gets dismantled, it will be grandfathered in. We have a lot of developers already put an appeal in, just in case. So if this one here does get dismantled, we won't be able to go to the Ontario OMB because there's no application put in by the developer. If it's coming back.
I'm not sure staff can answer because we don't know what, they talk about municipal planning or local planning councils, but we don't know what that means exactly. So a recorded vote has been called.
Members of committee, voting is now open with using your buttons, please. On
the motion that is before us.
On the screen. All members have voted. The motion carries 5-3.
Okay. Thank you. There are no matters on the referred matters list. No deferred, no notices of motion. We'll move down to council question period. Are there any questions from members of council? Yeah, I see you on this screen here. It's okay. Councillor Dillon?
So this question is in regards to the laying of sidewalks. I guess the new standard going forward, if I'm not correct, is 3 meters from where the curb is towards the house. I've had a number of residents I guess, convey their displeasure and have indicated it's impractical and unappealing. So the question, Alan, is in particular to Ward 10, the McVean Mayfield area. There's a number of upscale houses, and constant complaint that's come to me is that obviously it's too close. From what I understand, there's some issues that you guys have addressed as to why it's that close. I was just wondering if you can just clarify what those are and what if there's any possibility going forward that they could be closer to, further away from the home, and if this is going to be the standard for every new development going forward, both whether it's commercial or residential.
So through you, Madam Chair, I can't speak to the specifics of the locations of the sidewalks, and there are a number of matters that come into question and consideration as it relates to the approved standards that the city has for different road cross sections and how wide road pavement widths are, where sidewalks are located, where various street lighting standards, poles are located. There is engineering considerations. There are landscape details that are considered as well with respect to those approved road cross sections that then dictate where the sidewalks are to be located. I myself, I'm not familiar with any changes that are coming forward with respect to the locations of sidewalks. In some past and recent questions that have come to us from area residents about just the locations of sidewalks that they are displeased with in some way, I had provided some response just to generally speak to the fact that they're subject to approved standards, and the way in which they're located is after a determination of where certain services are located, pipes in the ground, some considerations towards snow clearing of the roads as well, some minimum separation distances between the pedestrian path, sidewalk location from the vehicle location as well. So, Councillor Dillon, I had not really through the response provided then, and really at this point in time, I can't speak to the details as to why necessarily the sidewalk is located as such, but for all those general considerations, for some more specific understanding on the why locating them in a very particular way, that would have to involve our open space and engineering staff as well.
So I'll email you in regards to that. You can provide that information then, is that correct? But just the last question is, though, so from what I take from your answer, this is not standard for every development. It's situational in terms of the area?
What I can provide generally through you, Madam Chair, is that there are standardized cross sections for different types of roads. And so a local road versus a collector road versus an arterial road, would have their standards. And I suspect that there are also some deviations from the standard just as you are closer to an intersection and some potential play there. But I can't confirm those.
So these are just regular local roads?
The ones that was identified through some inquiry just recently, it was a local road. That's right.
So, because I didn't get it from your answer, so there's no standard, because you contrasted the three types of road, arterial, local, and the other one. So there's no standard, speaking specifically to local roads, there's no standard for all areas going forward. It's just this particular area and this local road required the sidewalk to be placed at the distance it is.
So through you, Madam Chair, local roads have a standard approved cross section, and so that cross section would apply to a local road in Ward 10 and a local road in any other ward as well. So I understand that they're applied consistently across the board, across the city, unless there are certain engineering considerations to use. There are a couple of alternate development standards as well that are used in certain instances, but I can generally state that local roads have one standard that's approved for them, and there is also an alternate development standard that essentially is approved as well. Really offline, by all means, I can follow up with you further, Councillor, to understand some more details about some of the questions you have, and with engineering staff as well.
Speaking about a specific area, so I'll just connect with you offline about any possibilities going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Frattini.
Thank you, through the chair. Sorry I was late. I was going to add this to the agenda, but I heard that I could open it for discussion now. And for legal, maybe we can bring it back in the next planning meeting. So there's some issues in my area that I dealt with all summer in the M section, L section, and Cottrell and Airport Road in the V section. And I had Peel Police there at night, and JP and Paul Morris and John on Airbnb. So Toronto's looking, and I know a lot of condos, or like Grant Gibson said, in townhouses, they have a certain bylaw that you cannot rent a house less than 3 months. For that reason. So Toronto's looking at changing their bylaws or putting an amendment to their bylaw, because we've been having a lot of issues in the area. The people come there Friday night, stay Saturday, Sunday, pay, and they leave a mess, and all the neighbors are very upset. We got staff, they're cleaning beer bottles and garbage, because the garbage is not passed until maybe Wednesday, and they just put it in front. And I did talk to Paul Morris and JP, and they said we have to try to bring it to planning, put an amendment to the bylaw, do it 3 months. Anyone cannot rent a house less than 3 months. And I know a lot of condo corporations have it. Toronto's done just the same thing not too long ago. It was just in the paper. And if we don't get this on hand now, it's going to be like basement apartments. It's going to be out of control, and we won't have authority to go in. So if we have a bylaw, we could actually charge the owner at this time.
So, Councillor Frattini, if you were to put that in the form of a question, for question period, you could ask
staff to come back, or
what comments have, or what action have staff taken or contemplated taking with regard to Airbnb.
Well, and I understand, but we don't have a bylaw for them to do anything about it, unless you're not causing a problem at this time. At your residence, after 11 o'clock, they cannot actually tell you to shut the party down only.
So, Mr. Clerk, would this be more appropriately put on the bylaw and licensing section of Committee of Council? Because I think if you want to have a fulsome discussion, Councillor Frattini, I think that's what we should perhaps do. I see legal shaking his head.
Okay, well, I did talk to the staff, and they told me it has to come into planning because it's part of planning. So, that's fine.
Yeah.
So we could add it.
You can add it as a discussion item for the December 6th.
Okay, maybe we could have Paul Morris and JP Owen.
That'd be good.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Miles.
Thank you. My question is in regards to the resolution that we passed at Committee of Council in regards to the development charges and places of worship. So the Region of Peel is advising that they're going forward with the Section 20 hearing, which, based on our conversation, maybe does not make a lot of sense. Our recommendation was that they review the bylaw, and even though it hasn't gone there yet, but that they review the bylaw, and then they find relief for the applicant until the review is done. The clerk hasn't been able to find the actual council report where we dealt with it. I know you sent me the new places of worship policy, but it would have happened before then. So my question is when I spoke to the Region of Peel, they said this is the best way to do it, because if you relieve them until the development charge bylaw is reviewed, they would have to put down a retainer in the amount equal to the development charge. So that didn't make any sense. But I know we didn't do that. I don't know if Councillor Moore and Gibson can help me out here, but I think we simply passed a resolution to say that we were going to review the places of worship, the development charge bylaw as it relates to places of worship, and until such time we would defer any development charges to places of worship that came in front of us. And it was passed. It wasn't a big deal that I can remember. So my concern is that the 3 area municipalities that make up the region of Peel would exempt them. And yet the region of Peel's development charge bylaw is very prescriptive. I think it's discriminatory. It doesn't reflect the world we live in today that says the only thing they exempt is one sanctuary. So, and they're not being helpful, quite frankly. They're not being helpful. So the only place I can go to for help is here. I mean, it's my constituents. It's a regional bylaw. I would like to be able to give them the best advice possible. And I don't feel like that's happening. So I'm back to you, like a Section 40 hearing. What is that going to do? I mean...
Who wants to tackle that?
Yeah, pardon me. I'll give it a go, if I may,
or
through the chair.
Section 20.
So a Section 20 complaint, it's an argument that one would make to say that the application of the bylaw or the act itself hasn't been applied correctly. Part of my concern, and I understand that they have launched that appeal and it's going to be heard in January at the region, but there could be a defense from the region to say that, well, that's the bylaw we have in place and we've interpreted it properly. So I would be a little bit fearful that they might not get the result the applicant is looking for.
John Spravieri? Okay, sorry, I need your help.
Oh, yeah, I can.
Okay, sorry.
So this is where I think it's important for council to get the majority at the region, which I think is 13 members, to agree that they're not comfortable with the current interpretation of the bylaw. And maybe the interim step might be to, in fact, grant the difference through the tax-based grant program or some other means. But this is where I was somewhat reluctant to dictate how the region might best respond to that. But I think if council has a support over at the region to find a different way of looking at places of religious assembly, that's where I would leave it up to regional staff to then interpret how they want to best deliver on that direction from council. As I said, I know that Section 20 complaint has been scheduled for January, but there are other means available to them if council's wish is so to revisit that issue.
Can you tell me, is it legal for me to put a motion on the floor that says that we will enact an interim control bylaw? We will not levy development charges against places of worship that until such time as the bylaw is reviewed. Is that a legal step for me? Is it a legal step to take without the region saying they have to put up a guaranteed cash amount? Or
So I'm not familiar with the use of an ICBL for a development charge program. I'd have to really defer to our legal department to see if there's any advice on that, and I don't know if Mr. Zingaro is prepared to respond on the spot.
We'd probably get a different answer from our city solicitor than we would from the regional solicitor.
Well, through the chair, interim control bylaws for planning zoning type matters. It's not something that is used for development charges.
So what would we have
and the city has through the chair, the city has no control over what the region does with its development charge bylaw. The city is tasked with the responsibility of collecting development charges for both the region, the city, and the school boards.
Can I stop him? I know that, John. I know all that. So what did we do here? Because we did something. I want to know what we did. Because I know we did it. Because it was me representing North Bramley United Church on a development application, and we deferred their development charges until we reviewed the places of worship bylaw. There was another application in at the same time. I believe it was a Catholic church in Paul Pellechet's ward at the same time. They were both getting hit because their congregation was growing, and they were actually building another sanctuary, but the development charge bylaw only allowed them to have one. So we didn't make them pay. We waited until we reviewed it, and then they were exempt.
So through the chair.
So what did we do?
So from my understanding of the question, is that at some point in the past, the city staff looked at various applications that came in and provided a solution or an option to council to defer, I'm assuming, regional DCs.
No, city.
City DCs.
City DCs.
So we do have options in terms of our own DCs, in terms of providing grants in certain circumstances. But what I'm going to suggest is, because I'm totally unfamiliar with the circumstances that you're describing, and so I'd feel more comfortable if I were allowed to go back, maybe pull the files, find out exactly what it is that happened, and then come back to you with some additional information that would allow or assist you to move forward.
Okay, so we passed, I'm not asking you how to deal with the region. I'm just asking for advice. That's why I'm asking. I'm here asking for advice because it's in the city of Brampton, and I'm having difficulty dealing with the administration at the Region of Peel in regards to this DC bylaw. And I know what action we took in the past, and my memory was that it was an interim control bylaw. But maybe I could be wrong. But what I do know, without a shadow of a doubt, was that we deferred the DCs until we actually updated our DC bylaw. So, and we didn't ask for money. So I'd like to know how we did it so that I can ask consideration at the Region of Peel for the very same way. I don't really like the grant back because then you're actually having to pay from taxpayer dollars into the DC bylaw into DCs for the exemption. So I don't like that option. I just don't think they should have to pay based on their use.
So again, through the chair, the more I hear you describing this, I'm starting to understand what may have happened. And so if I'm able to pull the file, I can certainly get in contact with your office and go through what exactly happened. If the city had exercised an option, such as a deferral agreement until such time as the city was able to update its bylaw to remove the obligation to pay and so on, that's maybe what happened. And the same process could probably be undertaken at the region. But I'd like to be able to pull that file and then get back to you.
Okay, so if the one church that I know for sure was North Bramley United Church, and it was a development application to, they built a new sanctuary and whatnot. So I know that for sure. And it would have been prior to our last development charge review. So any assistance would be appreciated. So thank you.
Okay. There's no members of the public here. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Willens, all in favor? That's carried. Thank you.